I'm Sean, and I want to be straight with you about something I learned the hard way. For years, I thought the gap between people who stress about money and people who don't came down to how much they earned. Better salary, less stress, simple equation. Turns out I was completely wrong. The actual difference comes down to one number, and it's probably not what you'd guess. Stick with me because in the next few minutes, I'm going to show you exactly why this number changes not just your bank account, but the entire way your brain operates day to day. Let me start with something I used to do that I'm not particularly proud of. Whenever a friend would text about grabbing dinner or catching a game, I'd spend about 10 minutes coming up with a reason I couldn't make it. Not because I was busy, because I'd already done the mental math and the answer wasn't good. That's the life most people are quietly living right now. Every social invitation becomes a financial calculation. Every unexpected bill is a potential crisis. You're not making choices about your life. You're just managing damage. And the exit from that cycle starts at $10,000. Now, before you roll your eyes and click away, hear me out. Because the reason $10,000 matters has almost nothing to do with what you can buy with it. Most people who hit this number don't suddenly change their lifestyle at all. The transformation is completely internal, and it's more significant than anything a purchase could produce. The first shift is in how you relate to risk. I remember the first time I had a real cushion in my account, and my landlord mentioned the building might be sold. A year earlier, that news would have sent me into a full spiral. With savings behind me, my reaction was basically, okay, let's see how this plays out. Same information, completely different internal response. That's what $10,000 does. It doesn't eliminate problems. It changes your relationship with them. There's actual neuroscience behind this. Building financial reserves measurably reduces cortisol, the hormone your body releases under stress. So hitting $10,000 isn't just a financial event. It's a biological one. Your body literally operates differently when it knows there's a buffer between you and disaster. Think about the last time something broke unexpectedly. Maybe your phone screen cracked. Maybe your washing machine started making a sound that definitely wasn't normal. If your account was running close to zero, that moment probably felt like the opening scene of a very bad month. When you have $10,000 sitting there, the same situation is just an inconvenience you schedule around. That gap between crisis and inconvenience is where your quality of life actually lives. Here's something the standard personal finance content almost never says out loud. The emergency fund isn't really about emergencies. It's about what having it does to your decision-making on regular Tuesday afternoons when nothing is wrong. When I finally built real savings, I noticed I started saying yes to things I used to avoid. A professional development workshop that cost a few $100s. A trip I'd been postponing for 3 years. A conversation with my manager about where I wanted my career to go. None of those things required spending the savings. They just required knowing it was there. That's the mechanism most people miss. The money doesn't have to move to do its job. Let's talk about something called decision fatigue, because it's one of the most underrated ways that financial stress quietly drains you. Every single day, without a cushion, you're running a background calculation on almost every decision you make. Can I afford to take the highway and pay the toll? Should I refill the prescription now or wait until next week? Is it worth getting the oil change this month, or can it wait? Each of those micro-calculations burns real mental energy. Multiply that by 50 decisions a day, and by the time you get home, you're exhausted in a way that has nothing to do with how physically demanding your day was. When $10,000 is in your account, roughly 90% of those calculations simply stop. You're not budgeting at the gas station anymore. That recovered mental energy goes somewhere, and where it tends to go is toward actually improving your situation rather than just maintaining it. Now let's get into the identity piece, because this is where most savings advice completely falls apart. The people who successfully reach $10,000 don't get there by white-knuckling a strict budget for 6 months. They get there by quietly shifting how they see themselves. There's a version of you that spends everything and a version that builds. And the distance between those two versions isn't willpower. It's narrative. When I started thinking of myself as someone who keeps money rather than someone who earns and spends it, my behavior changed in ways I didn't even consciously plan. I started noticing subscription charges I'd forgotten about. I started cooking more not because I forced myself to, but because it fit the person I was becoming. Saving your first $1,000 is genuinely difficult. Saving your second is noticeably easier. By the time you're pushing towards $7,000 or $8,000, the habit is basically running itself. There's also a mathematical reality here that makes $10,000 specifically the right target. This amount covers the overwhelming majority of financial shocks that derail people's lives. Most car repairs outside of catastrophic engine failure land under $3,000. Most unexpected medical situations that don't involve major surgery come in under this number. A sudden gap in employment becomes survivable with 3 to 6 months of expenses covered depending on how you live. What this means practically is that once you clear $10,000, you are effectively immune to most of the disruptions that keep people stuck. Not all of them, but most of them. The confidence effect is something I want to spend a minute on because it shows up in places people don't expect. When I walked into my last salary negotiation, knowing I had real savings behind me, the conversation felt different. I wasn't negotiating from need. I was negotiating from preference. That's a completely different posture, and the person across the table can sense it, even if neither of you says anything about it. Studies consistently back this up. People with financial cushions negotiate higher starting salaries, are more likely to leave jobs that aren't working, and report higher overall career satisfaction. The savings don't make you better at your job. They make you less afraid to show what you're actually worth. Let's also talk about the social dimension because this one flies under the radar in most money conversations. Financial stress doesn't stay in your bank account. It follows you into every room you enter. When you're constantly worried about money, you become slightly less present in conversations, slightly quicker to irritate, slightly more likely to cancel plans or avoid situations where your financial picture might become visible. I've had friendships that quietly deteriorated during periods when I was financially stretched, not because of anything dramatic, but because stress makes you smaller and more withdrawn. Building savings doesn't just improve your finances. It brings you back into your own life in a way that's hard to fully describe until you've felt both sides of it. Here's a counterintuitive thing I've noticed about how people at different savings levels actually spend their money. When you have nothing saved, every dollar feels precious because it's practically irreplaceable. But when $10,000 is in the bank, individual dollars feel less precious, and that actually makes you more willing to deploy them toward things with real upside. The person running on empty skips a $75 industry event because $75 is a genuine sacrifice. The person with savings goes, meets the right contact, and ends up in a role paying $8,000 more per year. The cushion doesn't make you careless. It makes you willing to invest in your own trajectory. Now let's be honest about what $10,000 is not. It is not financial independence. It is not a number that lets you coast. You're still going to think carefully before spending $1,000 on something you don't genuinely need. But what it gives you is the one thing that makes every other good financial decision possible, which is room to breathe. When you're not financially suffocating, you can actually be strategic. You notice that your insurance renewal is coming up, and you have time to compare rates instead of just auto-renewing out of convenience. You realize a recurring charge has been quietly pulling money from your account for 11 months for a service you stopped using. Here's the reality check I want to leave you with. The average person is spending money in places they've completely stopped noticing. Subscriptions, convenience purchases, default choices that were never actually evaluated. Redirecting even a fraction of that spending consistently without dramatically changing your lifestyle gets you to $10,000 faster than most people believe is possible. The difference between someone who builds savings and someone who doesn't rarely comes down to income. It comes down to whether they ever decided to become the kind of person who does. So here's where I land on this. $10,000 is not just a number. It is a threshold that changes your neurology, your decision-making, your confidence, your relationships, and your sense of what's possible. The person you become while building toward it is worth more than the balance itself. If your account right now is closer to zero than to anything resembling a cushion, that's fine. Start with whatever amount you can actually sustain without burning out. Stay consistent.